22 Democratic candidates will descend on South Carolina Friday. It's for Congressman Jim Clyburn's world-famous fish fry. The contenders are hoping to clinch the state's primary. A victory there could prove more crucial than ever this year. CBSN anchor Elaine Quijano explains why.
Hello, South Carolina.
I love being in South Carolina. I will keep coming back.
Because I tell you what, I'm going to do everything in my power to earn the respect and the support of the people of South Carolina.
While Iowa and New Hampshire get most of the attention, South Carolina could play an outsized role in picking the next Democratic nominee, and candidates are taking note.
It's really important that we can bring people together and hear from all families about what their concerns are, and I think South Carolina plays a really prominent role in that.
South Carolina will be the first southern state to vote in 2020. Its primary is on February 29th, just 3 days before Super Tuesday.
Things I've learned here in my time in South Carolina is how strong the ties of community are.
And it's the first state where most of the primary ballots will come from African American voters.
And we have a president intentionally, purposely, is trying to divide us up by the color of our skin.
Our CBS News Battleground Tracker out this week shows former Vice President Joe Biden leading in the state, followed by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. But voters here are still weighing their options.
We need someone who's able to speak to health care issues, restorative justice, education disparities.
Healthcare ranks as the most important issue among Democrats here, followed by jobs in the economy, gun policy, and immigration. With South Carolina getting more attention, so is Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn. He's represented the state since 1992, the same year he established the fish fry.
We want every candidate to come here. We want them to help us build our party here in South Carolina, and I think I would be shutting that off if I were to take sides too early in the process. So I'm not going to take sides too early.
And Elaine joins me now from Columbia, South Carolina. We also have J.R. Berry and Maayan Schechter. J.R. is an anchor at our Columbia, South Carolina affiliate, WLTX, and Maayan is a statehouse reporter for the state. Welcome to all of you. Elaine, you've been on the ground talking to voters in South Carolina. How do they feel about all the attention their state has been getting in this presidential cycle?
Well, they're certainly aware of all this increased attention this presidential cycle. They have seen and heard from some candidates who've been making efforts to come to South Carolina this election cycle, but they also very much want to see and hear more from the candidates. That's one thing that voters we talked to today told us, is that they really want to get a feel for the rest of this very large and diverse group on the Democratic side. In fact, one voter told me that, look, with so many candidates, 24 of them, I want to make sure that it's not just the top polling folks that we hear from here in South Carolina, that we also want to hear from people who might not be as popular in the political polls right now, because he told me maybe it's the person who's ranked 18th or 19th who has a great idea. And this voter said, I want to make sure I hear what that candidate has to say.
So it sounds like voters are far from having made up their minds. JR, what kind of message are voters going to be listening for as candidates descend on South Carolina this weekend?
Well, a lot of them are going to be looking out for South Carolina values, what they believe in, what they've grown up with, and which candidate best supports that situation as far as those voters are concerned. You know, a lot of the voters in South Carolina, a lot of Democrat voters in South Carolina, they've been wanting a candidate to come along for quite a while now that can capture the imagination of the voters here in this state. The last time South Carolina voted for a Democratic candidate, and the last time we were a blue state in a presidential race, was Jimmy Carter way back in the 1970s. So it's going to take a lot to persuade these voters in South Carolina to turn this state from red to blue.
And Jimmy Carter was a Southerner, it's worth mentioning. Now, as we've been covering, Biden came under fire yesterday for comments he made about working with segregationists during the 1970s. Elaine, you asked South Carolina voters about this, and what did they have to say?
So this was interesting, Tanya, because I started off with a very sort of open-ended question. What do you think about Joe Biden? And people initially expressed, affection for him, obviously recalling the fact that he served as vice president under this country's first African-American president, but then others quickly spoke up and raised this issue of the segregationist comments. And they did so unprompted and almost sort of educating the group as we went along. And there was this interesting debate that unfolded. You had some folks saying, look, this is an issue of sensitivity. One woman told me, you know, he's one of us. I think of him like one of us, but he also has to be mindful of this sensitivity. And this is an issue that they very much felt that Representative Jim Clyburn essentially rescued Joe Biden on, as far as they were concerned, because it was Representative Clyburn who was one of the quickest voices to come out and essentially defend Joe Biden on this. So that was an interesting dynamic to watch as well. There is definitely a great deal of interest in how it is that Joe Biden has responded to Cory Booker's call for an apology. Some people that we talked to felt like there was a sense of disrespect, perhaps, in the way in which Joe Biden actually responded. So they're sort of waiting. They said, look, we don't know about an apology, but definitely they would like to at least hear an explanation. So it's something they're waiting out on. Now, Congressman Clyburn did appear to defend Biden a few weeks ago when the former vice president faced criticism over 1994's crime bill. Clyburn supported that legislation at the time. Maayan, is there a sense that Clyburn might be putting his support behind Biden?
That's everyone's. There is some thought about that. And actually, my colleague, Emma Dumaine, wrote a story recently where Bakari Sellers, who is a CNN contributor, former state House representative, and who also ran for lieutenant governor in 2014, came out and accused Clyburn of putting his weight behind Biden. But Clyburn is very, very quick to wave that off. He doesn't want to come out and quickly endorse a candidate before all 22 of them show up at his what you call world famous fish fry. But there are some voters who see those comments as a bit too defensive and maybe hinting at an endorsement down the road.
Now, Clyburn did criticize House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer. He told the Wall Street Journal, quote, "I've always managed a fully integrated staff. Pelosi doesn't have that experience, nor does Hoyer have that experience. To them, tokenism is all right with them." JR, what's behind those comments? And didn't he backtrack on that a little bit?
He did seem to backtrack on that earlier today. His office saying that Clyburn reached out to both Pelosi and Hoyer today, offering apologies and basically saying that they were good right now. So Clyburn has a history, though, of saying some things that may differ with others as far as those in his own party. He's done it here in South Carolina over the years. He says what's on his mind, and sometimes he will have to go and backtrack on some of the things that he said. You may recall just a couple of weeks ago, he talked about the impeachment probability of President Trump, but then walked back those comments after it differed with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. So Clyburn has always said what's on his mind, and sometimes he has to go back and say, well, that's not exactly what I meant to say.
Right. All right. So lastly, Elaine, as South Carolina voters gear up for this weekend, what specific issues are they hoping to see tackled in this election cycle?
So it is the same sort of list of issues that we have heard about in other areas, healthcare, student debt. But what seemed to jump out as being somewhat different, I think JR mentioned earlier, this notion of values. And when you talk to these voters about how it is that they look at these policies and these proposals, there are some who will talk about looking at it in a faith-based framework. How is it that the candidate articulates a sense of values with the policy proposals that are put forward? One example, immigration. They use the contrast of what they have seen from the current administration with what they would like to see from Democratic candidates. Those kinds of policy prescriptions are to them in many ways an expression of values and faith. So that to me was something that stood out as being something that is perhaps different from what we hear about in other early voting states, but they were very clear that for some of the voters here, a good deal of them, in fact, when they reflect on how it is that they are going to choose a candidate, this issue of faith, of having a sense of faith, is something that is important to them.
All right, Elaine, thank you so much for that, and we will see you tomorrow in Columbia. J.R. Berry and Maayan Schechter, thanks to both of you.